All right, let us continue with our Chapter 8 vocabulary. Chapter 8, Jarrett, Chapter 8, American Imperialism. But before we get to our second half of this presentation, I need to make a quick correction. I'm sure I did already, but I want to make sure that we all understand it. When I showed you the first half of this presentation, as we got to the Panama Canal, I made mention that it was Nicaragua who had dominated and controlled Panama, and it wasn't Nicaragua, it was Colombia. Don't know why I said that. I was wrong. To all Nicaraguans out there listening and watching this, I apologize. To you Colombians, bad Colombia. So, I know I've already corrected it, but I wanted to make sure that I corrected it now as well. So, Panama, Nicaragua, no. Colombia, yes. Sorry about that. Let's move forward. So let's begin. And as we wait for the slide, there we go. As we wait for the slide, there it is. Let's continue with the second half of our presentation. We are looking at the vocabulary terms. And so let us start with dollar diplomacy, number 19. Now, President Roosevelt had what is referred to as the big stick policy. It comes from a phrase he used, an expression he used quite a bit, walk softly but carry a big stick. Many presidents have a phrase, a term that is used to describe their presidency or their domestic agenda or their foreign policy. In this case, dollar diplomacy refers to the foreign policy of William Howard Taft, the president chosen by Roosevelt to be his successor. And what dollar diplomacy was, pretty simply, is Taft encouraged American bankers to invest in Latin America. Pretty simple. To invest in Latin American infrastructure, to invest in American companies who are going to do business in Latin America. It was hoped by Taft that his dollar diplomacy would lead to economic growth in Latin America, therefore making them a more suitable trade partner with America. Number 20, watchful waiting. Now, I do not know why this is in the book. I think it's a lousy term, but it's there, so we're going to use it. President Woodrow Wilson, who was first elected in 1912 and reelected in 1916, took this watchful waiting, this wait-and-see approach regarding the violence, and there was a lot of it, the violence in Mexico. Now, this takes us to our next number, 21, Pancho Villa, a Mexican rebel leader who ventured, and I like that term, ventured, oh yeah. No, he didn't venture, he raided, crossed the border into the United States. Now, Pancho Villa, let's take a few seconds to discuss him. Pancho Villa is often thought of as one or two people. Either he was a romantic figure, a hero fighting for Mexican freedom, Mexican independence, or he was just a bloody, vicious, murderous thug. One or the other. They're really... In today's world, there is no difference. I mean, there is no other option. Either he is a hero to be admired or a murderous thug. So, which one you choose to believe is your business. However, Pancho Villa and his men did come across the border several occasions. They robbed American banks. They stole a lot of money. And the American troops were sent to capture him, led by General Blackjack Pershing. Now, we'll talk about Pershing in a little bit more detail later on, but an American general, a cavalry general, was sent to capture him. They never did, by the way. Pancho Villa was able to evade us day after day, month after month, year after year, but he was such a threat, the American authorities believed that they sent an entire army after him, and they never were able to capture him. 22, Jose Marti. He, of course, is a Cuban exile. He left Cuba, came to America. He and some other Cuban exiles returned to Cuba and attempted to lead a rebellion against Spain for control of Cuba. Now, as I mentioned to you previously, Florida is only 90 miles from Cuba. It was relatively easy that day to get out of Cuba to America, and a group of those Cuban expatriates, Cubans who had left Cuba and come to America, banded together to take Cuba back from Spain. Now, of course, they didn't. They were crushed by the Spanish military. But it is, or let me rephrase that, his actions and the actions of these rebels prompted us to join the war on the Cuban side. And, of course, that goes into yellow journalism and all the things, the Dillon letter, everything else we've discussed up to this point. The Rough Riders, a volunteer force of cavalry. Of course, those are soldiers on horseback, which was started by Teddy Roosevelt and became the best-known group in the Spanish-American War. And, of course, Teddy became the biggest, best-known hero of the war. Roosevelt resigned his commission as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, put together this unit, and it was made up of volunteers. Some of them were cowboys from out west. Some of them were former slaves. Some of them were Mexican natives. I mean, there's a wide variety of individuals who joined. They got shipped to Cuba and participated in several battles, the most famous one being the battle at San Juan Hill. And this is the most noted battle, the most widely known battle of the Spanish-American War. And it was the efforts of Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders who made that possible. So you got the Rough Riders, started by Teddy Roosevelt, fighting at San Juan Hill. All right, let us continue with the next slide. Number 25, the American Anti-Imperialist League. Now, the most important phrase from this is anti-imperialist. These were individuals who were opposed to the Americas, or let me rephrase that, America getting involved in the acquisition of territory. So it was formed in 1898. Its sole purpose, it was created to oppose American acquisition of colonies. Now, they lost. The imperialists won, but there were a number of significant voices in America that opposed imperialism, like Mark Twain, like Andrew Carnegie. And so there was a voice opposing this. Now, they lost in the end, but again, it is important to realize and to understand that there were many who were opposed to this because of reasons we've already discussed. Because of the fact that obtaining colonies, obtaining possessions, kind of flies in the face of, kind of contradicts many of the values that are put forth in both the Declaration and the Constitution. Let's continue. Number 26, Guam, Samoa, Midway. These are several of the Pacific Islands that were acquired by America as a result of the Spanish-American War. Now, it doesn't mention the Philippines, and we've discussed the Philippines previously, but these are possessions, these are islands that Spain owned, and at the end of the war, during the peace treaty, those possessions were transferred to American control. 27, sphere of influence. Now, this deals with China. China is a large country, a vast country with large amounts of raw materials. What was going on is that England, France, Germany, Spain, and several other countries in Europe had divided China into what they call these spheres of influence, regions. Each country, just use England as an example, England's region was controlled by England. And if other countries want to trade with that area, that region of China, they would have to ask England for the permission. So essentially, the European powers divided China up for themselves, and those countries got special trade considerations. We were opposed to this because it essentially shut us out. If we did not get a chance to trade with China, we felt that this was unfair, and we opposed these spheres of influence. Number 28, Commodore Matthew Perry. Now, Commodore Perry forced, and I think this is important to understand, forced the Japanese to trade with us. Essentially what happened, he sailed a fleet of American warships to Japan, and through the threat of force, through intimidation, forced the Japanese to open trade with us. As it states here, he used American gunships to open trade. And this was in 1853. As the century unfolds, as we go into the 1890s and early 1900s, we see Japan rise as a result of this, become more westernized. In fact, if you ever seen the movie The Last Samurai, Tom Cruise's movie, The Last Samurai, which is a great movie, you will see that the Japanese are somewhat torn. Many Japanese want to westernize their nation. They're bringing in experts from Europe, English, French, German engineers, whatever the case may be, American soldiers, which is what Cruise portrayed in the movie. And so many Japanese wanted to become more modern, more westernized. Another group of Japanese wanted to remain the same. And again, that's what's happened in this movie, The Last Samurai. There is a battle for Japan between the modern and the old, between the modern industrialized Japan and the Japan of the samurai. Anyway, getting back to this topic, Perry forced the Japanese to trade with us by the force of threat. Number 29, Treaty of Portsmouth. The Japanese in the early 1900s, because of the trade with us, because of the expansion of their industrial strength, because of westernization, had also embraced imperialism. The Japanese attacked Russia, and war broke out. Now, Teddy Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, helped negotiate the Treaty of Portsmouth, which was a peace settlement between these two countries. Okay, so Teddy Roosevelt helps negotiate a peace settlement between those two countries, which, by the way, wins for him the Nobel Peace Prize in 1905. So, Teddy's president. Of course, he became president in 1901. Again, he was the VP under William McKinley. When McKinley was assassinated, murdered in early 1901, shortly after he was inaugurated, Teddy becomes president. The war breaks out a few years later, and through the efforts of America and Teddy Roosevelt, the war is settled. The war between the Japanese and the Russians is settled, and Teddy wins the Nobel Peace Prize. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Number 30, protectorate. This is a word that we use to indicate areas like Hawaii, Cuba, the Philippines, that are placed under U.S. protection. So when we acquire territories, as we did at the end of the Spanish-American War, we used all kinds of different names, protectorate being one, territory being another. The idea was that these areas, these islands, mostly islands, that we acquired were now under U.S. protection, and the word protectorate indicates that those areas, and again, it could be Guam, it could be Midway, it could be any of them, are now under U.S. military and economic protection. Number 31, Dr. Walter Reed. One of the most prestigious hospitals in the country is named after Dr. Reed. And what he did, and we're talking early in the 1900s, what he did is helped discover a cure for yellow fever. We talked a little bit about that previously. Yellow fever is a disease that is carried by mosquitoes, which Dr. William Gorgas discovers. Okay, mosquitoes like to breed in standing pools of water, which is why after hurricanes and heavy rains, it is advised often through the media that we, knock over buckets that have standing water or whatever the case may be. And so mosquitoes breed in this standing water, and mosquitoes carried yellow fever, which is a highly deadly disease. The mortality rate was probably upwards of 90% in many cases. So Gorgas discovers, he's an Army doctor, discovers that the yellow fever disease is carried by mosquitoes, and we know that mosquitoes like to breed in swamps, so we ordered all the swamps to be drained which would then therefore end a huge chunk of the threat of yellow fever. What Reed did was help discover a cure. And these are made possible, these are made necessary because of our building of the Panama Canal. Number 33, the Monroe Doctrine. Now, this is an old doctrine going back to 1823. President Monroe issues this in 1823, basically saying that we, the United States, will not allow European countries or others, primarily European, though there was a little bit of concern about Russia at the time, we would not allow European countries to form new nations in the Americas. Now, we didn't really have the ability to stop them. Fortunately, England agreed with us and sort of backed us up on that. But we didn't really have the power to stop them. But what we were trying to do was to protect the South American, Central American, Mexico areas from European control. Now, this benefits us as much as it does them. If European countries begin to get a larger foothold in the Americas, it would eventually challenge us, and that's something we did not want. So the Monroe Doctrine, which was issued in 1823, stated we're not going to allow Europeans to start new colonies in the New World. Now, if they already have a colony, they can keep it. Now, what does this have to do with what we're doing? Well, the Roosevelt Corollary. Okay? This was added to the Monroe Doctrine. Okay? So Roosevelt issues a corollary, an addition to the Monroe Doctrine. And now, and we're talking in the early 1900s, the Roosevelt Corollary is now being used to justify, in fact, let me clean this up just a little bit right there. There we go. To justify intervening in the Caribbean. Okay? So, Monroe Doctrine, 1823, Roosevelt Corollary, early 1900s. Roosevelt is saying we, thanks to Monroe, have the right to intervene in the Caribbean to protect them. To protect them. To protect them. From whom? Well, that's an awfully good question. In many cases, to protect them from themselves. This is all part of what is also known as the big stick policy. And again, as I mentioned earlier, Roosevelt liked to say, walk softly but carry a big stick. Basically, what he's saying is you don't have to yell and scream to get what you want done. But if people don't do what you want, you got that big stick to pop them over the head. And so the big stick policy, the Roosevelt Corollary, allowed the United States, and again, allowed is somewhat of a subjective word. It depends on how you view it or from what country you're viewing it from. It allowed the United States to send troops into the West Indies, which are a series of islands in the Caribbean, and into Central America, for example, Panama. Number 35. We only have a few more left. General John Blackjack Pershing. He is the man who led the American forces into Mexico looking to capture Pancho Villa. He never was successful. We never captured him, but that is what he did. Now, we will hear from General Pershing later on. He will lead the American Expeditionary Force into World War I. That's a few years down the road. But again, we will hear from him again. As we often do in history, an individual like Roosevelt, like Pershing, tends to show up on several different occasions. All right. We have a couple more, I believe, left. I think we have 2 or 3 more left. Reasons for expansion, and these are things that we've covered already, but let's look at them in greater depth. Number 1, raw materials. We're an industrial power, and we need raw materials. Now, again, America is a huge, vastly wealthy nation in terms of raw materials, but sometimes they run out. Sometimes other areas have more of a certain raw material we want to use. And so by acquiring new possessions, the Philippines, Hawaii, Cuba, on and on and on, that would then give us access to more raw materials or different raw materials. In addition, and I'm going to mark this as number 2, we want to create markets to sell our finished goods. We produce so much in America in this time, and we're talking the early 1900s. Because of industrialization, we produce so much, we can't sell it all to ourselves. We can't sell it all here in America. We need to have new markets. Now, This is not saying that we didn't trade. Yeah, we did. We traded with England and France. We traded with a number of countries. But any new markets we can open up means more money we can earn. That's why putting a business on the internet makes sense, because you're now opening the door to new potential customers. If you have a brick and mortar store, your customers are limited to the number of people who walk or drive by your business every day. If it's on the internet, then essentially there are several billion potential customers. New markets. That is what. Okay, sorry, I kind of got kicked off there for a moment. Let me finish that last point again, just in case I was cut off. We needed markets, new markets to sell our goods to. Number 3, strategic reasons. As a growing sea power, we needed bases throughout the world to protect American interests, to protect American ships, to protect American trade. So bases in Cuba at Guantanamo Bay, bases at Midway, bases on Midway at Pearl Harbor, they provide that protection. In addition, they also act as an early warning system. Many of you have a fence around your house, a door, a lock on the door, an alarm system, or perhaps your parents have a weapon, a gun. Those are all ways to protect yourself. The first one is that fence or that door. Well, our first line of defense in the Caribbean is Guantanamo Bay. Our first line of defense in the Pacific would be at Midway and at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Number 4, nationalism. Many people believe this is a way to demonstrate America's greatness. By expanding, acquiring new possessions, we are now also expanding the number of people who are allowed to participate in American democracy, American capitalism, American Christianity. Okay? So we are somewhat nationalistic, and again, I think we deserve to be a little bit. We believe that we are a great nation, and we are and have been. We want to expand that. We want to share that. We want to export American democracy, American capitalism, American Christianity. That's number 4. Number 5 kind of goes into the concepts we talked about previously, the white man's burden, which is from a Kipling poem, social Darwinism, which basically states that there are certain races, certain ethnic groups that are inferior, therefore certain groups are superior. And many Americans believe that it was the Anglo-Saxons, again we're talking English/French a little bit, mostly English, which of course are our fathers and mothers, that the Anglo-Saxon was superior. Okay, so we, and this is a little bit racist, and I'm not going to deny that, there's a little bit touch of racism there. Many Americans believe that the Anglo-Saxon lifestyle, that civilization was superior, and we wanted to help the less fortunate. Okay, now again, nothing wrong with that, but unfortunately a lot of times our help meant forcing them to do certain things. So by expansion, we are able to now have more people in Cuba, the Philippines, Hawaii, so forth and so on, that we can now help by converting them to Christianity or exposing them to American democracy, American capitalism. And finally, reasons for U.S. interest in the Caribbean. Okay? Number 1, hemispheric security. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. The Caribbean, let me make my one, oh, that's horrible. That's a terrible one. Let's try that again. Number 1, hemispheric security. Guantanamo Bay acted as a first line of defense. If anyone wanted to get to the states in the Gulf Coast area, anyone wanted to get into the Gulf Coast, into the Gulf of Mexico, they would have to go past Cuba and therefore past Guantanamo Bay. You add to that Puerto Rico and other islands that we eventually acquire, we're creating several front lines of defense. Therefore, giving us an early warning in case of an attack or a location from which we can launch an attack from against an invasion. Number 2, economic interest. Because of the agricultural nature of many of the islands, Cuba is renowned for its sugar and its tobacco. Because of that, there was a huge interest economically in these areas because we could then exploit it, invest money, build up infrastructure, and make money. And again, we are capitalistic. We're going to do things so we can make money. And finally, number 3, the need for a canal. The Spanish-American War proved that we needed a quicker way to go from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Sailing all the way around the southern tip of South America, which I believe one of the previous slides mentioned there, it was about a 16,000-mile journey from, I think, New York to San Francisco, I think it was that. But it's a long trip. And by building a canal across Central America and Panama, we would be able to save thousands upon thousands of miles, which could be months of travel time. And again, in business, time is money. The quicker I can get my goods to market, the more likely I am to make money. So, those are the reasons for U.S. interest in the Caribbean. And as I said, that is the end of the presentation. That concludes our look at the vocabulary terms from this chapter. Thank you. Bye.